All right. Welcome to day 3. I'd like to let everybody know that the website is up. You guys already heard that earlier, but just saying it for the recording. And more resources will be added, but they're there now at Great Plains Action Society .org and under the education section. All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off, just working through various LSAT questions to see how we can use logic to answer those questions. All right, so I'm going to do a quick review of how to graph Venn diagrams before we get going. All right, so with Venn diagrams, we're graphing categorical statements, and what we're saying is that all members of this group, or this group, they use S&P in logic often because subject and predicate in the sentence form. So all SRP, what we do is we shade this area of S that is outside of P. Not very good at shading. All right. And that shows us that there's nothing that's an S that is not also a P. That's the universal affirmative, the universal negative, no SRP. All right, and we shade this area of overlap in. It tells us that there's nothing that is both an S and a P. No SRP. All right, then we have particular statements. So we're still talking about categories, but we're talking about a member of a category. So at least one member of that category. So you can say some SRP. All right, and we indicate existence with an X. All right, so there is something that is an S and also a P. All right. And the particular negation. Some S are not P. So there's something that's an S that is not a P. So we put an X there to indicate something exists that is an S, but not a P. All right. So knowing how to graph categorical propositions using Venn diagrams can be helpful for solving LSAT questions involving categorical logic. And that's where we're going to start. Okay. Here we go. Roses always provide a stunning display of color, but only those flowers that smell sweet are worth growing in a garden. Some roses have no scent. All right, so we have categories of things here, so we can use Venn diagrams for working with this question. All right, so that's which of the following conclusions can be properly drawn from the passage. So we know that we're looking for conclusion. All right, so the categories we have are roses, things that display a stunning display of color, flowers that smell sweet, and things worthy of being grown in a garden. All right, so we have R, C, S, W. All right, I'm gonna move this over. Looking for a conclusion. All right. I brought a backup board in case I had trouble drawing on the smaller board, because you really need to get big circles. Those are hard for me to draw. So we have our 4 circles. We have a circle for the category of things that are roses, circle for things that smell sweet, circle for things that have a stunning display of color, and things that are worthy of being in the garden. In the garden. All right. So we have our premises. First one being, roses always provide a stunning display of color. So that's the saying as we translate. So always indicates that, we're talking about all the roses. So all are C. All right. Then we have our next but, so and, so that's indicates a new premise. All right. So, but only those flowers that smell sweet are worth growing in the garden. So all the flowers that are worth growing in the garden smell sweet. So all WRS. Right, so all roses are colorful. All flowers that are worthy of growing in the garden smell good, smell sweet. And then we have the last sentence. Some roses have no scent. All right. So we have some are not S. So we're translating having no scent as not being within the category of sweet. All right. So when we graph our Venn diagrams, we want to do our universals first. So the alls, because those show us what areas don't have anything in them. So we do the areas where we're shading areas so that nothing's in there, so that when we put the particulars, we know that certain areas are such that there's nothing there. So all R or C. So we're just looking at the 2 circles here of R, making this a little messy, and C. All right. When we say all R or C, we're saying there's nothing that's R that's outside of C. I'm going to shade this in a little more. There's nothing in this area. There are no roses that aren't displaying colorful. All right. Nothing in there. All right. Then we have all W are S. So we're looking at the circles we're looking at the relationship between W and S. So W and S. These 2 circles. Saying all W are S, we're saying that there is nothing in W outside of S. So shade this area in. Nothing exists there. All right, and then we have some are not S. So we're looking at the relationship between R and S here, these two. We're saying there is some R that is outside of S. So we see that this area is shaded in, and that's why it's important we do the shading first. So we know we can't put it there, so we put an X right there. All right. So because this is a valid argument form, it's truth preserving. And when we graph the truth of premises, the truth of the conclusion will be there on the graph as well. So you're not graphing something additional to the conclusion. The conclusion is just an interpretation of the information that is graphed. So let's look at the options and see which one we've graphed. All right, so the first one says, some flowers which provide a stunning display of color are not worth growing in a garden. So some C are not W. Okay, so C. All right, some C are not W. So there's some C outside of W. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's keep looking. All flowers with no scent display a stunning display of color. So we're looking at C and S. So all the flowers outside of S are C. We didn't graph that, did we? We don't see that on there. It's not the case that everything outside of S is C. All right. So check the next one. Some F. Where am I? Some flowers which are not worth growing in a garden have no scent. So some flowers outside of W all right. Sorry, these are really complicated to do with the 4 different categories. I will say that when you're taking the LSAT, as we saw with the first one, so some flowers which display a stunning display of color are not worth growing in a garden. So some C are outside of W. We just would have went with A. This is one where as soon as you find the answer, go with the answer that works and then mark a little mark or something by the question and say, I'm going to come back to this because working through the rest to make sure that this is right is going to take more time than I should be taking on the test. I'm bringing that up now because I was just checking the time and spent a lot of time on one question. So we got the main part, which was the answer is A. All right. Sorry to be jumping ahead a little bit. I just want to make sure I get through as many as I can in the time allotted. And working through all of those Venn diagrams is really time consuming. I want to make sure that we try to hit on as many different kinds of LSAT questions as we can during this time. So I made a point to find one that asks about a principle, because you're going to have those on there. All right, so let's look at this one. It says someone's benefiting from having done harm from another person is morally justifiable only if the person who is harmed knew what was done could cause that harm, but consented to it being done anyway. Which of the following judgment most closely conforms to the principle above? All right, let's try to isolate the principle above. And this is nice because it has indicator words that we can use to translate the sentence. So we see we have a claim that something is justifiable only if. So we know that what follows is going to be a necessary condition. All right. So someone's benefiting from having done harm to another person is morally justifiable. So harm is justifiable only if, so it means it's necessary, that the person who was harmed knew that what was done could cause that harm, but consented to being done anyway. And we see how I have an operator but there, so we know we're going to have a conjunction. So we have as our principle that harm is morally justifiable. It is necessary that the person have knowledge and consent. So if it's justifiable, then the person both knew what was going on and consented to it anyway. All right, so let's look at these and see if we can find an example that conforms to this principle. So A says, attempting to avoid being kept after school as punishment for breaking a window, Sonia falsely claimed that her brother had broken it. Sonia's action was morally unjustifiable since it resulted in both children being kept after school for something only Sonia had done. All right. Well, that doesn't seem to mention either knowledge or consent, so we can try to move past that one. All right, the next one said, since Ned would not have run a prize for best model airplane if Penny's brother had not inadvertently damaged her entry while playing with it, Ned is morally unjustified in accepting his prize. All right. So we look at this, and again, we see no mention of knowledge or consent. All right, let's look at C. Wesley, a doctor, persuaded Max to take part in a medical experiment in which a new drug was being tested. Since Wesley failed to warn Max about the serious side effects of the drug, and the drug proved to have no other effects, Wesley is morally unjustified in using the results obtained from Max in his report. Okay, so failing to warn would indicate that there is not knowledge in that case. All right, so that one looks really good. We're gonna go with that. If we're pushed for time, we move on, but try to go through these last two really quick. Because Roger's mother suffered severe kidney complications as a result of donating a kidney to him for a life-saving kidney transplant, it was morally unjustifiable for Roger to receive the transplant, even though his mother, herself a doctor, had been eager for his transplant to be performed. All right. All right, so we've got consent there. So we know that there's consent, but yeah, we don't have a mention of knowledge there. So let's see. E, sorry, lost my place. James was convicted for having defrauded a large number of people, that's a typo, sorry. Large number of people out of their life savings and wrote a book about his scheme while in prison. For James to be net his profits from the book would be morally unjustifiable since he had already been punished for his crime. All right, so again, our prompt doesn't mention anything about justification being linked to someone having already been punished. All right, so we're gonna go with C. And I wanna show something quick with C, how we can also double check that a little more. So if we can put C into notation here, it might make things look a little clearer. So Wesley, a doctor, persuaded Max to take part in a medical experiment. All right. Since Wesley failed to warn Max about the side effects, so since that knowledge condition wasn't met, and the drug proved to have no other effects, Wesley is morally unjustified. All right. So we have this information here. We plug in the principle. All right. It's our rule for justification. All right, we have not K and not E. Not E doesn't matter so much. We have not K then. So we have not K. We have, this is a rule of logic. We have not K and anything else. Not K, or sorry, or anything else. Not K or C. If we look at the truth table for the disjunction real quick. All right, true, 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 false. All right. So P being true is sufficient for the whole disjunction being true. So it doesn't matter what Q is. So we can tack on whatever we want using the disjunction. That rule is called addition. So that's substitution of a logically equivalent form. Logically equivalent because as long as P is true, P or whatever else is going to have the same truth value. So K being the case, or sorry, not K being the case, not K or C is logically equivalent. Sorry, let's do that. K or not C. So then we got not K and C. And then that gives us not J. From this, using our valid argument form, modus tollens. All right. And that makes sense, right? Just looking at the words. So our principle says if this action is going to be justified, the person needs knowledge about what's going to happen and the harm that can be done, and they need to consent to that anyway. Here we have an example where a person was used and a drug was tested on them. They were not informed about the potential side effects. So therefore, that action was not justified. All right. Let's try another one. Let's see. Yeah. Got the answers on there. C. All right. Let's look at this one. Let's look at first what kind of question it is. It says the reasoning in this argument is an error because. All right, so we know it's a flaw type question where we're looking for a flaw in the reasoning. So kind of knowing that going into the question. All right, it says some people have questioned why the homeowners association is supporting Cooper's candidacy for mayor. But if the association wants a mayor who will attract more business to the town, Cooper is the only candidate it can support. So since the association is supporting Cooper, it must have a goal of attracting more businesses to the town. All right. This argument is in error because, okay, and if we look at the sentences, we see that we can translate some of these into logical notation and look at the form and see if we can see the formal error being committed. All right, so we have, if the association wants a mayor who will attract more business to the town, Cooper is the only candidate it could support. So if they want to attract more business, then Cooper is the only candidate it could support. And we see the word only. We can take that as, a necessary condition indicator. So if they want to attract business, then they need to support Cooper. All right. So since the American Association is supporting Cooper, it must have the goal, so we're concluding, must have the goal of attracting more businesses to town. All right. So we have, if B then C, C, therefore B. All right. And so if we know our formal fallacies, we know that this is an instance of the argument form. If P then Q, Q, therefore P. And that is called affirming the consequent. All right, so this is an invalid argument form. All right, we can look at P then Q, Q, therefore P. Possible for all these to be true and the conclusion false. All right. So true, true, false. See, we didn't run into a contradiction. So that means it is possible, given this form, for premises to be true and conclusion false. So that form is a valid argument form. All right, and the prompt we read is an instance of that valid argument form. All right. Let's see which of the answers kind of lines up with our recognition that this argument committed the formal fallacy of affirming the consequent. All right. So the reasoning in the argument is an error because, let's see, A, the reason the homeowners association should want to attract more businesses to the town are not given. That's not relevant to the form of the argument here. The homeowners association could be supporting Cooper's candidacy for reasons unrelated to attracting businesses to this town. All right. All right. That kind of gets at what we're saying here. Sorry, didn't write that down right. So B is saying that Cooper's candidacy could be supported for reasons other than attracting businesses to the town. So while that would be sufficient, it's not necessary. All right. So just because they support it doesn't mean that that was the reason it was being supported. All right. So B kind of tells us that, in other words, they were mistaking a necessary condition for a sufficient condition. All right. So they could be doing it for reasons other than that. All right. Quick run through the other ones real quick. Just to make sure, but that one, yeah, matches the structure. So C says other groups besides the homeowners association could be supporting Cooper's candidacy. That's not relevant. The homeowners association might discover that attracting more businesses to the town would not be in the best interest of its members. Could happen, but doesn't have anything to do with the argument. Cooper might not have the skills that are needed by a mayor who wants to attract businesses to the town. Maybe, but not related to the structure of the parts. So the one that is B. All right. So yeah, that just shows how being able to recognize valid argument forms can save a lot of time, and understanding why they're in valid argument forms is also important for being able to translate that back into English. So confusing a necessary condition with a sufficient condition is why this argument form doesn't work. And that was what was explained in that answer there. All right. First, let's kind of look at what kind of question we're asking. It says, which of the following states an assumption on which the argument depends? So when they're asking for an assumption on which the argument depends, it means what premise is missing. All right, so our job is going to be to find the missing premise. All right, that's what an assumption on which it depends is a premise that isn't stated. So it's a missing premise. So we're going to try to find that. All right, so let's look at the question prompt. It says, until he was dismissed amid great controversy, Hastings was considered one of the greatest intelligent agents of all time. It is clear that if his dismissal is justified, that Hastings was either incompetent or else disloyal. Soon after the dismissal, however, it was shown that he had never been incompetent. Thus, one is forced to conclude that Hastings must have been disloyal. All right. So let's do some translation. So the first sentence, until he was dismissed amid great controversy, Hastings was considered one of the greatest intelligent agents of all time. Not really supporting the conclusion, that's just giving us some background information, so we'll leave that out. All right, here it says, it is clear that if his dismissal is justified, that Hastings is either incompetent or else disloyal. All right, so there we have a premise. All right, so if justified, so we got a conditional statement there. So if justified, then Hastings was either incompetent or disloyal. We have a disjunction there. So either I or D. Okay, there's our first premise. All right, soon after the dismissal, however, it was shown that he had never been incompetent. All right, not I. All right, thus one is forced to conclude that Hastings must have been disloyal. All right, so thus we have a conclusion indicator word. All right. And the is forced to conclude part hammers home that we are working with a deductive argument and looking at the form. All right, so the conclusion is D. All right, so we need to figure out what premise we need to get to D. All right, so to solve this, we look to see where is D in our premises. We see that we have D here as the consequent of a conditional in a disjunction with I. Well, we see we have not I here. So if we can get I or D, and we know not I, we have an instance of the valid argument form disjunctive syllogism, and we could get to D using a disjunctive syllogism. All right. What do we need to get I or D by itself? We need J. So J is needed to make this argument work. I'll make it all clear. So if justified, then incompetent or disloyal. Not incompetent. And we're looking for the conclusion disloyal. So what do we need? We need J, which will give us I, or D, which will give us D. All right, so let's look to the premises and see if we find one that says we are missing J. All right, so which of the following states an assumption on which the argument depends? A, Hastings' dismissal is justified. Yep, that's it. We can look through the other ones. So B, Hastings was a high-ranking intelligence officer. That doesn't, the conclusion doesn't depend on that. The dismissal of anyone who was disloyal would be justified. That's not what we're talking about right here. Anyone whose dismissal was justified was disloyal. That's not what the premises say. If someone was disloyal or incompetent, then his dismissal was justified. I mean, that doesn't get us to our conclusion, though. So our conclusion requires A, J. And that's just a really neat way to show how being able to translate these into logical form can show us what the conclusion is. How are we doing that? Okay, we can get through a couple more. All right. For democracy to survive, it is imperative that the average citizen be able to develop informed opinions about important policy issues. In today's society, that means that citizens must be able to develop informed opinions on many scientific subjects, from ecosystems to defense systems. Yet, as scientific knowledge advances, the average American is increasingly unable to absorb enough information to develop informed opinions on many issues. All right. Of the following, which one follows logically from the passage? All right, when we see that something follows logically, we interpret that as formally. So we're going to be looking at the structure. All right, and we see a bunch of translation indicator words in there. So let's try to get the argument premises isolated and see what follows. All right, so for democracy to survive, it is imperative that the average citizen be able to develop informed opinions about important issues. All right. So is imperative means necessary. So we know that what follows is going to be a necessary condition. All right. So if democracy is going to survive, then it is imperative that the average citizen be able to develop informed opinions about important policy issues. Okay, informed opinions. All right. In today's society, that means that citizens must be able to develop informed opinions on many scientific subjects, from ecosystems to defense systems. All right. Again, we have another condition indicator word, must. Must is another necessary. All right. So if they're going to be informed, then they have to develop informed opinion on many scientific subjects, from ecosystems to defense systems. So we're just going to go science. All right. Yet, as average scientific knowledge advances, the average citizen is increasingly unable to absorb enough information to develop informed opinions on many important issues. All right. So as scientific knowledge advances, the average citizen is increasingly unable to absorb enough information to develop informed opinion on many important issues. So we have, if knowledge advances, then the average citizen is increasingly unable to develop enough informed opinions on many important issues. All right. We have a bunch of conditionals there. All right. So if democracy is going to survive, we have to be able to develop informed opinions. If we're going to do that, we have to be able to keep up on science. But if scientific knowledge increases, then we're not going to be able to keep up this information. All right. So we got these. Let's see what these entail. All right, we can put some stuff together looking at these. So we have if D, then I. And then if I, then S. So we have if D, then S. All right. We can switch some stuff around. All right, we can perform transposition, which is a substitution of a logically equivalent form. If P, then Q is logically equivalent to, if not P, then not Q. If you think about it, it makes sense, right? P is necessary for Q. If you don't have Q, you don't have P. All right, so we can switch these around. If I, then not K. We have, again, another I there. We have if D, then not K. All right, I should put this. If D, then not K. Okay, so those are a few things that, working with the conditionals and hypothetical syllogisms, we can work out of the premises. Let's see if the options available represent what we've worked out. Okay, so let's look at A. Which of the following, which one follows logically from the passage? A, scientists have a duty to educate the public. I mean, maybe, but that's a whole other thing. That's bringing in new information. Remember, with a valid argument and where something follows logically, you're not getting any new information. It's just a rearrangement of the parts. So if they're bringing in new information, you can rule out that option. All right, B, the survival of democracy is threatened by the advance of scientific knowledge. Okay, we do have a D and a K over here. All right, and so we have, if democracy is going to survive, then we can't have this increase in scientific knowledge. We can switch these around again. So if D, then not K is the same as if K, then not D. So the survival of democracy is threatened by the advance of scientific knowledge. So the knowledge threatens to not have democracy survive. B. All right. We can quick look through the other ones. Every citizen has a duty to and can become scientifically literate. Not within the scope of the argument. The most effective democracy is the one that is most scientifically unsophisticated. You know, there we've got the mention of scientific knowledge, but the prompt itself doesn't mention anything about the effectiveness of democracy. So let's bring in new stuff, rule that one out. Democracy will survive if there are at least some citizens who are capable of developing informed opinions on scientific issues. That doesn't follow from the premises. So we see that B, the survival of democracy is threatened by the advance of scientific knowledge, is the correct answer given the structure of the premises. And also don't get thrown off too much thinking about whether or not you agree with the answer. So whatever is logically entailed, could be false, but it's still a valid entailment. So don't focus too much on whether or not you think what is being concluded is true. Just look at the relationship. All right, I think we have time for one more. Oh, yeah, the easy answer. Answers in there. All right. Let's see. English and the Austronesian language, Barbarum, both use the word dog for canine. These two languages are unrelated. And since speakers of the two languages only came into contact with one another after the word dog was first used in the language, neither language could have borrowed the word from the other, sorry, the typo, from the other. Thus, this case shows that sometimes when languages share words that are similar in sound and meaning, the similarity is due to neither language relatedness nor to borrowing. Right. The argument requires which of the following be assumed. All right. Again, so if it's asking what needs to be assumed, we're asking what premise is needed. All right. So let's see if we can work translating our argument into notation, or at least making a more abstract version of it. Let's start with the conclusion. All right. So we look and we see the word thus. All right. Thus, this case shows that sometimes when languages share words that are similar in sound and meaning, the similarity is due to neither language relation. The similarity is due to neither language relatedness nor to borrowing. All right, so that's a conclusion. Share a word, not borrowing, not related. All right, so that's our conclusion. So some language shares a word where there's not borrowing and the languages are not related. So let's look at the premises that we used to get there and see what's missing. All right, so starting out, English and the Austronesian language, Barbarum, both use the word dog for canine. So E and M both use the word dog for canine. All right, so E and M use dog. So this isn't full-on notation. We're just kind of getting the rough form. All right. These two languages are unrelated. So E and M are not R. All right. And since the speakers of the two languages only came into contact with one another after the word dog was first used in the language, neither language could have borrowed the word from the other. So they're not related, and we have an "and" there. Not borrowed from each other. All right. And from that, we're concluding, then we have our conclusion. This case shows that sometimes languages share words. Similarity is due to neither relatedness nor borrowing. All right, so let's kind of look at our premises. All right, we have an instance where E and M both use the same word. And in this situation, they're not related and the word's not borrowed from each other. We have our conclusion. There is some language where a word is shared and it's not borrowed from another language. Throw it out there. So when we have not borrowing, we're talking about not being borrowed from any other language or not related to each other. All right. So if we look at our premises, we say, all right, we have the shared word. We're not questioning that part. All right. So we have E and M are not related to each other. That's fine. All right. And they did not borrow the word from each other. And then here we have the word is not borrowed from another language. So we're going from a specific instance of not borrowing here to a general claim about not borrowing, and that doesn't hold up. So we're going from okay. We're going from, it's not the case that A borrowed from B to, it's not the case that A borrowed from anything, all right? And so that is where the argument falls apart. So if we can see where it doesn't work, we know then what we need to add to it to make it work. All right, and let's see if we find that in our answers here. All right, so the argument requires which of the following to be assumed. All right, so as it is not valid, missing a premise, what is it? A, English and Barbarum share no words other than dog. That doesn't matter. I apologize for all the typos. Sorry. B, several languages beside English and Barbarum use dog for the word for canine. And that doesn't affect this. Usually when two languages share a word, those languages are related to each other. I mean, sure, they could be, but that doesn't matter here because we already know the two languages we're talking about aren't related. All right. There's no third language from which both English and Barbarum borrowed the word dog. All right. So if it was the case that they borrowed from another word, it would be false that we have a word where the two languages that use it were not related and that that word was not borrowed from another language. All right. So D is our missing premise. We need more information to go from this specific instance of not borrowing to not borrowing from any. So we need to say that there's no other language from which the word is borrowed. All right, and then E. Let's look at the last one. If two unrelated languages share a word, speakers of those languages must have come in contact with one another at some time. Again, not related to the conclusion. Answer is D. Yes, I stopped exactly at 5 o'clock. That's awesome. Does anybody have any questions? Thanks for just kind of letting me talk through those problems and try to show how we can use logic to figure out those questions.
It was great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot of talking. I get really dry and it's hot in here.
No, thank you. It was really, really helpful.
Okay, I'm gonna